I opened the envelope with mild curiosity, not expecting anything particularly interesting from the law firm I'd never heard of. Inside was a certified letter, heavy cream-colored paper with official-looking stamps and signatures. As I unfolded it, a property deed slid out onto my kitchen table. "What the hell?" I muttered, picking up the deed. It was for a cabin in Alaska, apparently now mine, left to me by my great-uncle Garrett. I barely remembered the man. He'd been a distant figure at a couple of family gatherings when I was a kid, always standing off to the side with a wary look on his face. My mom had mentioned years ago that he'd moved to Alaska to get away from it all, which everyone in the family took as code for went a little nuts. I set the deed aside and read through the letter. Standard legal stuff about inheritance and property transfer, but stapled to the back was a handwritten note on lined paper. The handwriting was shaky but precise, like someone had taken great care with each letter. Rules for the cabin. 1. Do not leave the cabin between midnight and 3 a.m. 2. Ignore any sobbing sounds you hear outside. 3. Always wear bright red while hiking in the surrounding woods. 4. If you see a man in a blue suit on the trail, do not speak to him. 5. Do not open any locked wooden boxes you find. 6. Never leave the cabin after dark. I read through the list twice, then let out a short laugh. Jesus, Uncle Garrett, you really did lose it up there. The rules were specific enough to be unsettling. I wondered if he'd had dementia toward the end. The lawyer's letter mentioned he'd died 3 months ago, but didn't specify how. Heart attack, probably. The old guy had to be pushing 80. I tossed the papers on my coffee table and flopped onto my couch, staring at my apartment ceiling. My lease was up in 2 months, and I'd been dreading signing another year at these prices. My job at Tech Future wasn't going anywhere. I'd been passed over for promotion twice now, and my boss kept piling on more work without any recognition. The property deed caught my eye again. Maybe this was an opportunity. I could take some of my unused vacation time, check out the cabin, and see if it was worth anything. Alaska real estate probably wasn't exactly booming, but even a modest sale would give me some breathing room financially. "Screw it," I said to the empty apartment. "Let's go to Alaska." The next day, I requested 2 weeks off work. My boss barely looked up from his laptop when I told him, "Whatever, James. Just make sure those reports are done before you go." I spent the next few days getting ready. I packed light, some clothes, my laptop, toiletries, and a few books. While digging through my closet, I found my old hiking jacket, bright red Gore-Tex that I'd bought years ago for a trip to the Cascades with friends. I almost laughed when I saw it. Bright red, just like rule number 3. "Guess I'm accidentally following the rules already," I said, stuffing it into my duffel bag. I booked a flight to Anchorage for the following Monday. The tickets were cheaper than I expected. Apparently not many people traveled to Alaska in late September. The lawyer had included GPS coordinates for the cabin in his packet, so I planned to rent a car and drive out there. The flight was long but uneventful. I spent most of it reading about the area where the cabin was located, a sparsely populated region with more trees than people. When we landed in Anchorage, the air had a crispness to it that Seattle lacked, a hint of the coming winter. At the rental agency, I realized a car wasn't going to cut it. "You're heading where?" the agent asked, looking at the address I'd written down. "About 6 hours northeast of here," I said, showing him the map on my phone. "Is that a problem?" He shook his head. "Not if you take one of our trucks. The roads get rough out there. No way a sedan's making it, especially this time of year." I ended up with a black Ford F-150 that cost more than I'd budgeted for, but I didn't have much choice. I loaded my bags into the back, programmed the GPS, and hit the road. The first few hours weren't bad. Decent highways, occasional gas stations, and small towns. But as I got farther from Anchorage, civilization thinned out. The road narrowed, then turned to gravel. The trees grew thicker on either side, towering pines that blocked out most of the sunlight. My phone lost service about 4 hours in. The GPS kept working, thankfully, but I couldn't help feeling increasingly isolated. Every mile took me farther from the world I knew. The last hour was the worst. The road was barely more than a trail, rutted and rough. The truck bounced and jolted over every bump, and twice I had to stop to move fallen branches out of the way. The sun was getting low, casting long shadows through the trees. Just when I was starting to think I'd made a huge mistake, the trees opened up. I drove into a small clearing, and there it was, the cabin. It was bigger than I'd expected, a solid-looking structure built of dark logs with a steep roof. A covered porch wrapped around the front with a couple of wooden chairs facing the clearing. There was no sign of any neighbors, no other cabins or houses visible in any direction, just endless forest pressing in from all sides. I parked the truck and got out, stretching my back after the long drive. The silence hit me immediately. No traffic noise, no people, not even many birds. Just the soft whisper of wind through the pines and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. Standing there, looking at this isolated cabin that was now mine, I felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. The place matched Garrett's letter perfectly. Remote, surrounded by dense forest, completely cut off from the rest of the world. I grabbed my bags from the truck and walked up to the front door. A heavy iron key had been included with the deed, old-fashioned and weighty in my palm. It turned smoothly in the lock, and the door swung open with a low creak. I stepped inside, into the dim interior of my inheritance, wondering what exactly I'd gotten myself into. I took my time exploring the cabin, surprised by how well-maintained everything was. The main room had a comfortable-looking couch and armchair arranged around a sturdy wood stove, with a small kitchen area tucked into one corner. Bookshelves lined the walls, packed with old volumes whose spines showed the wear of frequent handling. "Not bad, Uncle Garrett," I said to the empty room, running my fingers along the wooden table that dominated the center space. The surface was smooth, recently polished from the feel of it. I'd expected something much more rustic, maybe even run down, but this place looked lived in and cared for. I checked the kitchen cupboards and found them stocked with canned goods and basic supplies. The water from the tap ran clear after a few seconds of sputtering. In the bathroom, I discovered a shower stall with decent pressure, another pleasant surprise. This was starting to feel less like a wilderness outpost and more like a legitimate home. After checking the living areas, I headed outside to find the generator. It took a few minutes of searching, but I located it in a small shed behind the cabin. The unit looked relatively new, not the ancient contraption I'd imagined. I studied the controls, found the startup procedure outlined on a laminated card tacked to the wall, and followed the instructions step by step. The generator coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. I smiled as I headed back to the cabin, flipping a light switch just inside the door. The overhead light came on immediately, casting a warm glow across the wooden floors. Electricity. Definitely not roughing it, I muttered, feeling a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Part of me had been preparing for a real wilderness adventure, but I couldn't deny the comfort of modern conveniences. With the basics sorted, I decided to check out the bedroom. The door creaked slightly as I pushed it open, revealing a simple space with a double bed covered in a thick quilt, a dresser, and a nightstand. The room smelled faintly of cedar and something else, maybe pine soap or cologne. My eyes landed on a small wooden box sitting on the nightstand. It was about the size of a cigar box, made of dark wood with intricate carvings along the edges and a brass lock on the front. I stepped closer, hand automatically reaching out before I remembered the fifth rule. Do not open locked wooden boxes. I pulled my hand back quickly, feeling oddly foolish. The box just sat there, innocent-looking and ordinary, but something about it made me uneasy. Maybe just because it had been specifically mentioned in the rules. I turned away from it and focused instead on unpacking my clothes into the dresser drawers. As evening approached, I settled into the armchair by the wood stove with one of the books I'd pulled from Garrett's shelves, a worn copy of Jack London's The Call of the Wild. It seemed fitting for my first night in Alaska. The pages were dog-eared, with notes in the margins in what I assumed was my great-uncle's handwriting. I read for a couple of hours, occasionally glancing at my watch. As midnight drew closer, I found myself growing tense, eyes darting to the windows and door more frequently. The first rule echoed in my head. Do not leave cabin between midnight 3 a.m. This is ridiculous, I told myself, but I couldn't shake the growing unease. I checked that the doors and windows were locked, then settled back into the chair, book open but no longer reading. Midnight came and went. I listened intently but heard nothing unusual, just the wind moving through the trees outside and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. No sobbing sounds, no strange visitors, just normal night noises in a remote location. Around 1 in the morning, I finally gave up my vigil and went to bed, careful to keep my eyes averted from the wooden box on the nightstand. Despite my nervousness, exhaustion from the long day of travel took over and I fell into a deep sleep. I woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. For a moment I forgot where I was. Then the unfamiliar ceiling and the smell of wood brought it all back. The cabin, Alaska, my great-uncle's strange rules. After a quick breakfast of instant coffee and a granola bar from my supplies, I decided to explore the surrounding forest. The day was clear and cool, perfect hiking weather. I grabbed my bright red Gore-Tex jacket from where I'd hung it by the door. I hesitated before putting it on, feeling silly about following a rule that seemed so arbitrary. But something about being alone in this remote place made me cautious. Better safe than sorry, I thought as I zipped up the jacket, its bright color almost glowing in the morning light. The forest around the cabin was dense with tall pines and spruce trees. As I stepped onto one of the narrow trails leading away from the clearing, I was struck by how quiet everything was. No bird song, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just a heavy, waiting silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I pushed forward anyway, telling myself it was just my imagination working overtime after reading those rules. The trail wound through the trees, occasionally opening into small clearings before plunging back into the shadows. I took mental notes of landmarks to help find my way back. A lightning-struck tree, an unusual rock formation, a small stream crossing. After hiking for about 2 hours, I rounded a bend in the trail and stopped short. A man stood about 20 yards ahead, facing my direction. He wore a dark blue suit that looked completely out of place in the wilderness. No hiking boots, no backpack, just formal business attire as if he'd stepped out of an office building rather than the Alaskan forest. He smiled when he saw me, a wide grin that didn't reach his eyes, and took a step in my direction. His mouth opened as if to speak, and I suddenly remembered the 4th rule. Do not speak to man in blue suit on trail. My heart hammered in my chest as I quickly looked away, avoiding eye contact. Without thinking, I stepped off the path into the trees, making it clear I wasn't going to engage. The stranger stopped moving. From the corner of my eye, I could see him standing perfectly still, just watching me. He didn't call out or try to follow as I'd feared. He just stood there, silent and unmoving, until I'd put enough distance between us that I felt safe glancing back. He was still on the trail, his dark figure stark against the green backdrop. Then, without any rush, he turned and continued walking in the direction he'd been headed, away from the cabin. I waited until he disappeared from view before returning to the trail. My earlier enjoyment of the hike completely gone. As I hurried back toward the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The sensation crawled up my spine and settled between my shoulder blades, a persistent awareness that something was following me, tracking my movements through the trees. I kept looking over my shoulder but saw nothing. Still, the unsettling feeling stayed with me for the entire walk back, like a shadow I couldn't shake. The forest, which had merely seemed quiet before, now felt actively hostile, as if the trees themselves were observers reporting my movements to some unseen presence. By the time the cabin came into view, I was walking so fast I was nearly jogging. I didn't slow down until I reached the front porch, my breathing heavy, not just from exertion, but from a deep, instinctual fear I couldn't fully explain. I sat at the wooden table, laptop open, the glow of the screen illuminating my face in the dim cabin. I'd been searching for hours about the property, trying to find any information about Garrett's time here, or local legends that might explain his weird rules. Nothing came up. Not a single mention of the area having any strange history or my uncle's connection to it. Just property records showing he'd bought it 15 years ago from a private cellar. "This is useless," I muttered, closing yet another dead-end search page. The battery icon on my laptop blinked red, reminding me I'd been at this for too long. Outside, the darkness had completely taken over. Through the window, I could see absolutely nothing beyond the glass, just black emptiness where I knew the forest stood. I shut my laptop and stretched, my back stiff from hunching over the screen. The silence hit me again, that complete absence of sound that felt almost physical. No distant traffic, no hum of neighbors' TVs, no random city noises, just the occasional creak of the cabin settling. I got up and made my rounds, checking each window latch and testing the front door's lock twice. The wooden floor creaked under my feet as I moved through the cabin. I paused at the bedroom doorway, my eyes landing on that wooden box still sitting on the nightstand. Something about it made me uneasy, like it was watching me. "Not tonight," I said to no one, turning away from it. I brushed my teeth, changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants, and climbed into bed. The quilt was surprisingly comfortable, though the mattress sagged slightly in the middle. I set my phone on the nightstand, noting it still had no service, but at least showed the time. 11:43 p.m. Sleep came easier than I expected. The day's hike had worn me out, and despite the strange encounter with the man in the blue suit, my body demanded rest. I woke suddenly, unsure what had pulled me from sleep. The bedroom was pitch black. I fumbled for my phone, squinting at the bright screen. 1:30 in the morning. That's when I heard it. A soft, almost hesitant knocking at the front door. I sat up, instantly alert. The sound came again, 3 gentle taps as if someone was trying not to be too loud. I held my breath, listening. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just a branch hitting the cabin. The knocking came again, slightly louder this time. Definitely the front door. No one should be out here, I whispered to myself. There's nothing for miles. I remembered Garrett's first rule. Don't leave the cabin between midnight and 3 a.m. The knocking continued, growing more insistent. No longer polite taps, but firm, demanding knocks. Someone, or something, wanted in. I stayed frozen in bed, covers pulled up to my chest. My mouth went dry. The knocking pattern changed. Now it sounded like someone was using both hands, the rhythm becoming almost frantic. "Go away," I said, too quietly for anything outside to hear. The pounding continued, sometimes pausing for 30 seconds before starting again with renewed vigor. I checked my phone again. 2:25. Nearly an hour had passed with this terrible knocking. I considered grabbing something to defend myself, but that would mean leaving the bedroom, getting closer to whatever was at the door. Instead, I stayed put, counting the minutes, hoping 3 a.m. would come quickly. The knocking suddenly stopped. The silence felt almost as bad. At least with the knocking, I knew where the threat was. Then I heard it, a soft, hiccuping sob, a child's cry. A young girl's voice, trembling and broken with tears, came from somewhere near the front porch. "Hello?" the voice called between sobs. "Please, I'm lost. Can anyone help me?" My chest tightened. A lost child in these woods at night? The crying moved, now coming from the side of the cabin near the kitchen window. "Please," the girl's voice begged. "I'm scared. It's so dark out here." I nearly got up then. Every instinct told me to help. But Garrett's second rule flashed in my mind. Ignore sobbing sounds outside. The crying circled to the back of the cabin, then to the other side, making a complete loop around the building. It paused outside my bedroom window. "I can see your light," the child's voice said, though I hadn't turned on any lights. "Please help me." My hands gripped the sheets so tightly my knuckles turned white. Something was very wrong about this. No child would be out here alone, miles from any other home, at nearly 3 in the morning. The sobbing grew louder, more desperate right outside my window. I opened my mouth and began to recite, my voice shaking badly. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures." The crying cut off immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. "He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul," I continued, my voice gaining strength. Nothing outside made a sound. "He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." I kept going until I'd finished the psalm. By then my phone showed 2:58. I stayed awake until after 3, but nothing more happened. Eventually exhaustion pulled me back to sleep. Morning sunlight streamed through the bedroom window when I woke. Birds chirped outside, the first normal wildlife sounds I'd heard since arriving. I lay in bed for a long time, trying to convince myself I'd dreamed the whole thing. After a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal, I decided to search the cabin more thoroughly. There had to be something here that would explain what was happening. I started in the main room, checking behind books on the shelves, looking under furniture, tapping walls for hollow spaces. The kitchen cabinets yielded nothing unusual, just more canned goods and basic supplies. In the bedroom, I emptied each dresser drawer, checking under and behind them. The third drawer stuck slightly. When I pulled harder, I noticed a folder taped to the bottom of the drawer above it. I carefully peeled off the tape and opened the folder. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the cover worn and the pages yellowed with age. Garrett's name was written on the first page in faded blue ink. I sat on the bed and began reading. The earliest entries were mundane. Notes about building repairs, weather observations, wildlife sightings. Then, about 5 years in, the tone changed. "Saw the man in the blue suit again today," one entry read. "He was standing at the edge of the clearing when I returned from checking my traps. He smiled and raised his hand like he wanted to speak to me, but I remembered what old Jim told me when I first moved here. Never speak to him. I hurried inside and locked the door. He stood there for hours just watching the cabin." I flipped forward several pages. "The Petersons' cabin is empty. They've been gone 3 days now. Tom Peterson told me last week he heard crying outside their place and went to investigate. His wife said he opened the door and spoke to something, then walked into the woods. She followed him to the edge of their clearing, calling his name, but he never looked back. She came to my place the next morning, frantic. We searched all day but found nothing. Now she's gone too. Their door was standing wide open this morning like they'd just stepped out." My hands trembled as I turned more pages. Garrett had documented everything: the knocking, the crying, the blue suit man, and neighbors who vanished after breaking the rules. Near the end of the journal, the writing became more urgent, the pen pressing harder into the paper. "Whatever's in these woods is getting stronger. I can feel it watching me even in daylight now. The box contains the only proof I have. The photos I took that show them. They don't appear to normal sight, but the camera catches glimpses. I've locked it away. The box must never be opened here. If it's opened in these woods, they'll know someone can see them. They'll know they've been exposed." The final entry was dated just 3 months ago, shortly before Garrett's death. My heart isn't good. If I don't make it, the cabin goes to James. I've left the rules. I hope he follows them. I hope he never opens the box. What's in the forest is ancient and patient. It knows my time is ending. Last night the knocking was the worst it's ever been. The crying circled the cabin for hours. I said the psalm until my voice gave out. It's getting stronger. God help whoever comes next. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. The wooden box on the nightstand seemed to draw my attention, almost calling to me. What proof did Garrett have inside it? What had he seen in these woods that no one else could? I looked out the bedroom window at the sunny forest beyond. It looked so normal, so peaceful in the daylight. But now I knew what came with darkness, and the thought of spending another night here made my skin crawl. I woke to knocking. It started as a light tapping that might have been branches against the cabin walls, but quickly became more deliberate. 3 sharp raps, a pause, then 3 more. My eyes flew open in the darkness, immediately aware it was happening again. The digital clock on my phone read 2:15 in the morning. I lay perfectly still, holding my breath as the knocking continued, moving from the front door to the side of the cabin, then around to my bedroom window. I pulled the quilt tighter around me. James. My entire body went rigid. That voice, it wasn't the child's crying from last night. It was my sister's voice. Exactly my sister's voice. James, are you in there? Please help me, I'm lost. I sat up, heart racing. The voice was perfect. The slight rasp when she said my name, the way her pitch rose slightly at the end of sentences, the faint trace of her Portland accent. James, I don't know how I got here. I'm scared. Something's following me in the woods. My hand moved toward the bedside lamp before I caught myself. Stella was in Portland. I'd texted her yesterday afternoon. This wasn't her. Please, James, I can see light inside. I know you're there. I gripped the edges of the mattress. The voice sounded so real, so genuinely frightened. It moved again, circling back to the front door where the knocking resumed, harder now. It's getting closer, James. Please let me in. Please, I'm your sister. My legs swung over the side of the bed. I stood up, taking a step toward the bedroom door before stopping myself. I knew the rules. I remembered Garrett's journal entries about neighbors who had disappeared after opening their doors. James, why won't you help me? The voice broke, sobbing in exactly the way Stella did when we were kids, and she'd skinned her knee badly falling off her bike, the same hitching breath between sobs. I backed up until my legs hit the bed again. I sat down heavily, covering my ears with my hands. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. I began reciting, my voice shaking so badly I could barely form the words. He makes me lie down in green pastures. The knocking intensified, becoming a frantic pounding that seemed to shake the entire cabin. James, it's right behind me, please. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. I continued louder, trying to drown out the perfect imitation of my sister's terrified screams. The pounding became a scratching sound, like nails or claws dragging across the wooden door. I kept reciting, eyes squeezed shut, hands pressed against my ears, rocking slightly on the bed. The psalm tumbled from my lips over and over as the scratching continued, punctuated by what sounded like Stella crying. I don't know how long I sat there repeating those words. Eventually the sounds faded. The scratching stopped. The crying grew distant, then silent. When I finally looked at my phone again, it was after 3 a.m. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the bed, back against the headboard, staring at the bedroom door, until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the curtains. When the room was fully lit by morning sun, I finally stood on shaky legs and made my way to the front of the cabin. I hesitated before approaching the door, half expecting to find Stella standing there, confused and hurt by my refusal to help her. Instead, I found deep gouges in the wooden door that hadn't been there before. 4 parallel lines, about shoulder height, carved deeply into the solid oak. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the splintered wood. Whatever had made these marks had considerable strength. The gouges were nearly half an inch deep in places. I stepped back, looking at the peaceful forest beyond the porch. Birds were singing now. The morning looked perfectly normal, sunny and calm. But those marks were real. Physical evidence that something had been here. Something that could perfectly mimic my sister's voice down to the smallest detail. I went back inside and started packing my bags. I'd seen enough. Whatever was happening here, I wanted no part of it. I stuffed clothes into my duffel, not bothering to fold anything. I gathered my toiletries from the bathroom, my laptop from the table, tossing everything haphazardly into my bags. As I moved through the bedroom for a final check, my eyes landed on the wooden box sitting on the nightstand. I'd been avoiding looking at it directly since arriving, respecting Garrett's 5th rule. But now, with my bags packed and ready to go by the door, I found myself drawn to it. The box was small, maybe 6 inches square, made of dark wood that had been polished to a soft sheen. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The craftsmanship was remarkable. Intricate patterns carved into each side, flowing together in a continuous design that seemed to shift slightly as I rotated it. The lock was brass, old-fashioned but sturdy. Looking closer, I noticed symbols carved into the wood around it, not just decorative patterns as I'd first thought, but actual symbols. Some looked like runes or ancient letters, others like tiny pictographs of trees and what might have been stylized human figures. I set the box back down, telling myself to leave it alone, to respect Garrett's rules that had so far kept me safe. But the memory of that voice, Stella's voice, was still fresh. How could something mimic her so perfectly? What was out there? My eyes scanned the room and landed on a small framed photograph of Garrett on the wall. Something made me walk over and lift it. Behind the frame, hanging from a small nail, was a tiny brass key. I stared at it for a long moment. Every instinct told me to put it back, to grab my bags and leave this place immediately. The scratches on the door flashed in my mind. But I couldn't stop thinking about what Garrett had written in his journal, about photographic evidence, about things invisible to the naked eye. I took the key and returned to the nightstand. My hand trembled slightly as I inserted it into the lock. It fit perfectly. I hesitated, then turned it until I heard a soft click. I opened the box. I opened the box and found a stack of old photographs. The images showed the forest around the cabin, taken from different angles and distances. At first glance, they seemed like ordinary nature shots. Pine trees stretching toward the sky, the small clearing where the cabin sat, a section of the narrow hiking trail I'd walked yesterday. But as I looked closer at each one, my stomach tightened. There were shapes in the trees, dark forms that didn't belong. In the first photo, what I initially took for a shadow between 2 pines wasn't a shadow at all. It was a tall, thin silhouette with proportions that weren't quite right. Arms too long, neck too stretched. I might have missed it entirely if not for the unnatural stillness it seemed to project even in a static image. I flipped to the next photograph. This one captured a wider view of the forest from what looked like the cabin porch. 3 dark shapes stood at different points among the trees, partially hidden behind trunks but clearly watching the cabin. They were blurry, as if the camera couldn't quite focus on them despite the rest of the image being sharp. "Jesus," I whispered, my fingers trembling slightly as I moved to the next photo. This one showed the stream I'd crossed during my hike. Something was crouched by the water, a hunched figure that blended with the rocks but was definitely not a rock. Its outline suggested a human form, but wrong somehow, like a child's attempt at drawing a person. I worked through the stack quickly now, finding similar shapes in every picture. They were always at the edges, partially hidden, watching. Not a single photo was free of them. What made it worse was knowing I'd stood in many of these exact spots yesterday, completely unaware. The final photograph hit me hardest. It showed Garrett standing outside the cabin door, wearing a flannel shirt and holding what looked like a hunting rifle. He was looking directly at the camera, his expression grim. Behind him, looming at least 2 feet taller, stood a dark figure. It was barely visible against the cabin's shadow, but once I spotted it, I couldn't unsee it. A tall, thin presence standing impossibly close to my great-uncle. Something he couldn't have seen with his naked eye, but the camera had captured. The sound of footsteps on the porch jerked me out of my horrified trance. I froze, photographs still in hand. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, heel to toe, moving across the wooden boards outside. It was broad daylight. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting warm rectangles on the cabin floor. According to Garrett's journal, the strange happenings only occurred at night. But the footsteps continued, unmistakable. I moved to the front window, staying to the side of the frame. Through the glass, I saw him, the man in the blue suit from the trail. He was walking directly toward the front door, his movements smooth and precise. His suit looked as pristine as it had in the forest, not a wrinkle or speck of dirt visible despite the surrounding wilderness. He stopped at the door and turned his head toward the window where I stood. Our eyes met, and he smiled. His teeth were visible even from this distance, white and pointed, too numerous and too sharp to be human. The smile stretched his face unnaturally wide. My heart pounded against my ribs. The man's lips began moving, saying something I couldn't hear through the glass. He gestured toward the door, then made a turning motion with his hand, mimicking the action of opening it. I backed away from the window, clutching the photographs to my chest. The footsteps resumed, moving away from the door and along the side of the cabin. A tap came at the kitchen window, then another. The man was circling the building, testing each potential entrance. I heard the back door handle jiggle, then another window rattle as he tested it. The sound moved around the cabin's perimeter, methodical and unhurried. My bags sat by the front door where I'd left them, packed and ready for my planned escape. I looked from them to the window where the man had first appeared. He would complete his circle soon. I needed to move. I stuffed the photographs into my jacket pocket and grabbed my duffel bag and laptop case. The tapping and testing of windows continued around the far side of the cabin. I calculated quickly. If I went out the back window in the bedroom, I might have just enough time to make it to the truck before he completed his circuit. The bedroom window was small, but big enough for me to fit through. I set my bags on the bed and unlatched the window, pushing it open as quietly as possible. The fresh morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine. I heard the man's footsteps approaching the bedroom side of the cabin now. I had seconds at most. I pushed my duffel through the window first, letting it drop to the ground outside. My laptop case followed. Then I hoisted myself onto the windowsill, legs first, squeezing through the narrow opening. As I pulled my upper body through, I heard the bedroom door open behind me. I didn't look back. I tumbled out the window, landing awkwardly beside my bags on the soft ground. I grabbed both bags, one in each hand, and ran toward the tree line where my truck was parked, not daring to look back at the cabin or the man who was now surely watching me flee. I ran into the forest without my red jacket, clutching the photographs while branches tore at my clothes. The forest seemed to close in around me, pine needles slashing at my face as I crashed through underbrush. Every step took me deeper into the woods, away from the cabin and whatever had entered through my bedroom door. "James," the voice called from behind me, echoing through the trees. It started as the pleasant professional tone of the man in the blue suit, but with each repetition it distorted. "James." Now it stretched and warped, no longer sounding human at all, more like several voices layered together, some too deep and others impossibly high. I didn't look back. My fingers cramped around the stack of photographs as I stumbled over exposed roots and rocks. My breath came in ragged gasps, burning my throat. The laptop bag banged against my side while my duffel strap dug into my shoulder, both weighing me down as I tried to remember which direction I'd parked the truck. "This way is faster, James," the voice called, now coming from somewhere to my left. I jerked right, pushing through a thicket of bushes that scratched my arms. The forest wasn't making sense. I'd hiked these woods just yesterday. There should be a clear trail leading back to the clearing where I'd parked. Instead, every direction looked the same, endless trees stretching into shadow. The path I followed narrowed, then widened, then disappeared completely. I turned around, trying to retrace my steps, but the way I'd come looked nothing like I remembered. The forest was shifting around me, playing tricks. A path would appear between two trees that seemed promising, but when I rushed toward it, it vanished or led to a dead end of dense undergrowth. "You're going the wrong way," the voice said, closer now, almost conversational. It sounded like it was walking calmly while I crashed through the forest in panic. I tried to use the sun for direction, but the thick canopy blocked most of the light. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was lost. The realization hit me like a physical blow, making me stop and double over, hands on my knees as I tried to catch my breath. That's when I saw it. A splash of bright color among the browns and greens of the forest. My red Gore-Tex jacket hung from a tree branch about 20 yards ahead, the fabric almost glowing against the dark bark. I straightened up slowly, staring at it. I hadn't left my jacket there. I hadn't left it anywhere in the forest. It had been in the cabin, draped over a kitchen chair where I'd placed it after yesterday's hike. "Take it," the voice whispered, now somehow all around me. "You'll need it." That made me hesitate even more. Why would the thing chasing me want me to have the jacket? Unless it wasn't the thing that had placed it there. I approached cautiously, expecting the jacket to disappear like the phantom paths, but it remained solid and real. When I touched the sleeve, the material felt exactly like my jacket. Waterproof Gore-Tex, slightly worn at the cuffs. I grabbed it and checked the inside collar where I'd written my name in permanent marker years ago. There it was. James Finley, in my own handwriting. I looked around, searching for whoever might have hung it there, but saw only trees and shadows. With the photograph still clutched in one hand, I awkwardly pulled the jacket on, struggling to manage both bags while slipping my arms through the sleeves. As soon as the jacket settled on my shoulders, something changed. The forest seemed to stop shifting. The paths no longer appeared and disappeared. Instead, I could make out a clear route through the trees ahead of me, leading in what I was suddenly certain was the right direction. The red seemed to push back against the shadows, creating a small bubble of clarity around me. I remembered Garrett's rule: always wear bright red while hiking in the surrounding woods. With renewed determination, I adjusted my bags and moved forward along the newly visible path. The voice behind me grew more distorted and angry, no longer trying to sound human or friendly. "Take it off," it growled, the sound seeming to come from the trees themselves. I kept walking, faster now that I could see where I was going. The forest still felt wrong, too quiet, with occasional whispers that might have been wind through leaves or something else entirely. But at least I wasn't lost anymore. After what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes, the trees began to thin. Relief flooded through me as I spotted the clearing ahead and, more importantly, the black Ford F-150 parked at its edge, exactly where I'd left it. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the clearing with golden light that was rapidly fading. Sunset. I'd spent the entire day in the cabin, and now daylight was running out. Exactly when Garrett had warned never to be outside. I broke into a run, crossing the clearing with my bags bouncing awkwardly against me. When I reached the truck, I fumbled with my pocket, nearly dropping the photographs as I pulled out the keys. My hands shook so badly I had to use both to steady the key enough to slide it into the door lock. Once inside, I threw my bags onto the passenger seat and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I nearly cried with relief at the sound. I reached for the gear shift, then froze, my eyes caught by the rearview mirror. The man in the blue suit stood at the edge of the clearing where the forest began. He wasn't running or pursuing me anymore, just standing perfectly still, watching. His suit remained immaculate, without a single wrinkle or speck of dirt, despite having apparently chased me through the woods. As I stared, he slowly raised one hand. The gesture might have been a wave goodbye, but something about the deliberate way he held his arm made it feel more like a warning or a promise. I didn't wait to find out which. I shoved the truck into drive and pressed the accelerator to the floor. The tires spun in the dirt before catching, and the truck lurched forward onto the rough trail that led away from the cabin, away from the forest, and away from whatever was wearing a blue suit and a human face that wasn't quite right. I returned to Seattle and immediately began researching the photographs I'd taken from Garrett's cabin. My apartment felt too small, the walls closing in as I spread the disturbing images across my kitchen table. Each picture showed those dark figures lurking at the edges of the frame, watching, waiting. I needed to know if anyone else had encountered them. Using my laptop, I searched for disappearances in that remote Alaskan region. The first few results seemed unrelated. Hikers lost in national parks, a few hunting accidents. But when I refined my search to include the specific area around Garrett's property, a pattern emerged that made my stomach drop. Over the past 50 years, at least 7 people had vanished without explanation. The newspaper archives showed brief mentions, most treated as wilderness mishaps. Local man missing after storm. Read one headline from 1992. Another from 2004 simply stated, "Search called off for missing woman." I dug deeper, finding scanned police reports through public records requests. The details were eerily similar. In each case, neighbors or family members had reported the person missing only after days or weeks without contact. When authorities finally checked the properties, they found the cabins empty, beds unmade, and doors standing open, as if the residents had simply walked out voluntarily in the middle of the night, just like Garrett had written about Tom and Mrs. Peterson. I printed everything I found, creating a folder of evidence that connected to the photographs. One report mentioned a witness statement about strange noises outside a cabin the night before a disappearance in 1978. Another described how a missing hunter's wife insisted he would never leave without his bright orange safety vest. After 3 days of research, I couldn't stand having Garrett's property in my name anymore. I contacted the law firm that had sent me the deed and explained I wanted to sell immediately. The lawyer seemed surprised but didn't ask questions. "It's quite valuable land," she said over the phone. "We can list it at a competitive price." "I don't care about the price," I told her. "I just want it gone." When she emailed the paperwork, I made one critical addition. I typed up Garrett's 6 rules and included them with the deed transfer, labeled as property guidelines. The lawyer called back, confused. "These unusual requirements, are they really necessary?" "Yes," I said firmly. "They need to stay with the property. It's non-negotiable." She paused before responding. "Very well, though it may deter some buyers." "Good," I whispered after hanging up. I kept the photographs locked in my desk drawer. They were my evidence, my proof that I wasn't crazy, that what I'd experienced was real. Sometimes late at night I'd take them out, studying the dark shapes among the trees, trying to make sense of what they were. But I never showed them to anyone. I couldn't risk someone else becoming a target. 2 weeks after returning home, it started. The first night, I barely heard it. 3 soft knocks at my apartment door around 2 in the morning. I froze in bed, listening. 3 more knocks, slightly louder. I pulled my blanket tighter, remembering Garrett's second rule: ignore the sobbing sounds outside. I didn't get up. I didn't answer. I lay perfectly still until morning. The next night, nothing happened. The night after that, the knocking returned, A bit louder, more insistent. This time it continued for nearly 30 minutes before stopping. I pressed my pillow over my ears and recited Psalm 23 under my breath until it went away. The knocking became a regular occurrence, happening 2 or 3 nights a week. Sometimes it would be gentle, almost polite. Other times it would be hard enough to make my door rattle in its frame. My neighbors never mentioned hearing anything, and I never asked. By the 4th week, the voices started. "James, it's Mark from work. I need to talk to you about the Henderson project." My boss's voice, perfectly mimicked down to the slight nasally quality when he said my name. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, knowing it couldn't be him at 3 in the morning. Another night. "James, please, I forgot my key again." My sister Stella's voice, complete with her distinctive laugh at the end. The worst was when it used my mother's voice, calling me Jimmy, like she did when I was a child. That night, I couldn't stop shaking for hours afterward. I learned to ignore them completely. When the knocking started, I'd put in earplugs and recite the psalm over and over until the sounds faded. Sometimes I'd turn on music, just loud enough to mask the noises without disturbing my neighbors. I never acknowledged the knocking, never called out who's there, never looked through the peephole. I installed 3 new locks on my front door, a deadbolt, a chain, and a sliding bar that braced against the floor. I put new locks on all my windows too, even though I lived on the 4th floor. I bought blackout curtains for every window and kept them closed at all times. None of it made me feel safe. After a particularly bad night when the knocking had gone on for over an hour, I searched online for paranormal researchers in Seattle. I found a woman named Dr. Eleanor Jenkins who specialized in unexplained phenomena. Her website looked professional with credentials from respectable universities. No mention of ghosts or demons, just investigating unexplained sensory experiences. I sent her an email, carefully worded to sound rational. I mentioned experiencing unusual auditory phenomena following a trip to Alaska. I didn't include anything about the figures in the photographs or the man in the blue suit. She responded the same day, offering to meet at her office on campus. We scheduled an appointment for the following Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. I spent the days leading up to the meeting debating what to tell her. Should I bring the photographs? Would showing them to someone else put them at risk too? What if sharing my story somehow made things worse? The morning of the appointment, I placed the folder of photographs in my messenger bag. I showered, dressed in clean clothes, and even shaved, trying to look as normal and credible as possible. I left my apartment with plenty of time to reach the university campus. I made it as far as the parking lot outside her building. Through the windows, I could see a professional office setting, students walking through hallways, normal everyday life continuing. Dr. Jenkins would be waiting inside, ready to listen, maybe even ready to help. But as I reached for my car door handle, a sudden, overwhelming certainty stopped me. If I shared what I knew, if I showed those photographs to someone else, I would be putting them in danger. Whatever had followed me from Alaska was watching, waiting for me to break another rule. I started the car again and drove home, leaving the appointment unattended. Dr. Jenkins sent a follow-up email asking if I wanted to reschedule. I never responded. That night, for the first time in weeks, there was no knocking at my door. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It followed me everywhere, to work, to the grocery store, even to the coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment, where I'd started spending my Sunday mornings trying to feel normal again. The sensation clung to me like a second skin, making the hairs on my neck stand up at random moments throughout the day. One evening, I was washing dishes at my kitchen sink when movement across the street caught my eye. I glanced up and froze, my hands still submerged in soapy water. A man in a blue suit stood on the sidewalk directly opposite my apartment building. Even from the 4th floor, I could tell it was the same immaculate dark blue suit I had seen in Alaska. He stood perfectly still, his face tilted up toward my specific window. I backed away from the sink, water dripping from my hands onto the linoleum floor. For 20 minutes, I peeked through the edge of my kitchen curtain, watching him. He never moved, not to check a phone, not to shift his weight, not even when a group of college students walked past him on the sidewalk. They didn't seem to notice him at all, walking around him as if he were a lamppost or mailbox. After an hour, I checked again. He remained in the exact same position, still staring up at my window. The streetlights had come on, casting him in an orange glow that somehow made him look even less human. Another hour passed, and another. He stayed until well past midnight, a statue in a blue suit. I closed all the blinds in my apartment and turned off every light, sitting in darkness on my bedroom floor with my back against the wall. Sleep was impossible. When morning came, I crawled to the window and peered through a tiny gap in the blinds. The sidewalk was empty. After that night, I began avoiding windows after dark. I kept my blinds permanently closed, only opening them during daylight hours when absolutely necessary. I took the stairs instead of the elevator in my building to avoid the glass-walled lobby. At work, I requested to move my desk away from the floor-to-ceiling windows that had once been my favorite feature of the office. My coworkers thought I'd developed a sudden sensitivity to light. I didn't correct them. 3 weeks after the blue suit sighting, I received an email that made my blood run cold. The subject line read, "About the Alaska property." The sender's name was unfamiliar, Daniel Mercer. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something made me open it. "Mr. Finley," it read, "I recently purchased your great-uncle's property in Alaska and have been staying here for the past week. I wanted to ask about the voices. They started on the second night. At first I thought it was just the wind, but they sound so real. They sound like my daughter. The rules you included with the property mention wearing red while hiking. Does that really help? What about the knocking? It kept me up until 3 a.m. last night. Any advice would be greatly appreciated." I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the reply button. What could I possibly say? "Sorry, but ancient entities are trying to lure you outside at night. The red jacket creates some kind of protection bubble in the forest." I knew how it would sound. More importantly, I knew responding might make things worse, for him and for me. I closed the email without replying and tried to push Daniel Mercer from my mind. I hoped he would figure it out like I had, or better yet, leave before things escalated. The guilt of not warning him more explicitly gnawed at me, but I reminded myself that I had included all 6 rules with the property transfer. I'd done what I could without putting myself at further risk. 2 days later, a package arrived at my door. No delivery notification, no tracking number. Just a plain brown box sitting on my welcome mat when I returned from work. It had no return address, only my name and address printed in block letters on a white label. The handwriting looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. I brought the package inside and set it on my kitchen table, eyeing it warily. It wasn't very large, about the size of a shoebox, and surprisingly light when I picked it up. After circling the table a few times, I finally worked up the courage to open it. Inside, beneath layers of crumpled newspaper, sat the wooden box I thought I'd left behind in Alaska. The same dark, polished wood with intricate carvings, the same brass lock, the same weight and dimensions. I stumbled backward until I hit the wall, my breath coming in short gasps. It was impossible. I had left that box on the nightstand when I fled through the bedroom window. There was no way it should be here, in my apartment thousands of miles away. Yet, there it sat, its carved symbols seeming to shift in the kitchen light. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to open it to know the photographs would still be inside. The evidence of things that shouldn't exist, watching from the edges of reality. Instead, I closed the cardboard box and taped it shut again, then placed it in a garbage bag and tied it tightly. That night, I drove 2 hours north of Seattle to a remote hiking area I'd visited once years ago. I brought a shovel from the trunk of my car and hiked a mile into the woods by flashlight. When I found a suitable spot far from the trail, I dug a hole 3 feet deep, placed the bag containing the box inside, and filled it in. I scattered leaves and branches over the disturbed earth until it looked undisturbed. On the drive home, somewhere around 1 a.m. on a deserted stretch of highway, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just another car's headlights in the distance, but the light didn't behave right. It moved too erratically, sometimes disappearing completely before reappearing closer. I pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing my car well above the speed limit. The shape in my mirror grew more distinct, a dark silhouette that seemed to flow rather than drive along the road behind me. It kept pace with my car even as I hit 90 miles per hour. I didn't slow down until I reached the outskirts of the city, where streetlights and late-night traffic provided some sense of safety. When I checked the mirror again, the road behind me was empty. I had survived my encounter with whatever haunted that remote cabin, but the experience left me forever changed. I found myself constantly listening for sounds others couldn't hear. The distinctive pattern of 3 knocks, the subtle difference between wind and whispers. I watched for figures others couldn't see, shapes at the edges of crowds, 2 still observers on street corners, reflections that moved independently in windows. My life became defined by a constant state of vigilance against threats only I could perceive. I kept my red hiking jacket hanging by the door at all times. I never stayed out after dark if I could help it. I recited Psalm 23 so often that the words became a reflexive mantra whenever I felt uneasy. Sometimes, on particularly bad nights when the knocking at my door was loud enough to rattle the new locks, I wondered if I had truly escaped at all, or if I had simply brought something back with me, something patient and ancient that would wait as long as necessary for me to make a mistake.